Hi, this is Brian Bieron with PlatformEconomyInsights.com, and the big news today is that Margrethe Vestager, who is the Danish European Commissioner, she's been in the current European Commission government structure for the past 5 years as the head of the European Competition Authority. So that's one branch of the sort of European central government dealing with competition law. She has just been reappointed to the same position in the new European Commission structure going forward for the next 5-year term. That's big news. Number one, it's a little bit surprising. I don't believe it's been done before that a commissioner of the Competition Authority has been reappointed to a second 5-year term, giving the kind of potential run as the head of that agency that we will see from Commissioner Vestager. It's also big news because she has made quite a name for herself in her role as the head of the Competition Authority. Why? In particular, because she has been quite aggressive and quite fixed on the importance of having competition law adapt to, in particular, the digital economy and the largest digital platforms. A little bit of history. She followed up on the term of Joaquin Almunia, the Spanish commissioner who led the Competition Authority in Europe from 2010 to 2014. A little history. That was the time that, in particular, the Google cases, in particular Google Shopping, was a case that began in Europe. That case literally began back in 2010. And what did it deal with? It dealt with whether or not Google was treating other comparison shopping services fairly in their search algorithm. It was kind of a two-part question. Number one, were they demoting rival shopping search businesses in the overall internet search service that Google offered? And were they sort of inappropriately preferencing their own offering, the Google Shopping service, in comparison to how they treated competitors? So you had questions related to both how they were treating others in general search and whether they were unfairly preferencing their own service. And so you've had that going on since 2010. Halfway through the process, basically, Commissioner Almunia stepped down. Many thought that his aggression going after Google was too low, that he was not being tough enough on Google, who in Europe in particular has search marketing shares that are truly immense. They are recognized as literally offering like 90+% of searches in many of the European markets. And so he was not working towards a really strong conclusion of the case in Europe. Competitors did not like where he was going. When he stepped down, because his term came to an end, Commissioner Vestager stepped in and ended up taking a much more aggressive stance. And so you've since, under her first term, had conclusions of the Google Shopping case, a Google case regarding Android and how they deal with phones and the phone makers and phone sellers, and then the apps that get preloaded onto phones, as well as a case that deals with the Google advertising network and AdWords and AdSense. So she's made quite a name for herself on Google in particular, but she's done a lot more. We may remember that she was called earlier this year that tax lady by President Donald Trump. Now, that had to do with the fact that in her time as the head of the Commission Commission on Competition, she's brought some cases against big multinational companies that question the tax deals that they were arranging with individual European countries. So the idea was that those tax deals were unfair state aid, which she argues gives an unfair competitive advantage to the companies that get that state aid. Now, very high-profile cases were brought against Amazon, Apple, but also Starbucks and Fiat. I mention that because, first of all, only some of the companies are big digital platform companies, and also 3 of the 4 were, yes, U.S. companies, but one of them was a European-based company, Fiat, the automaker. So she argues quite strenuously that her effort on taxes was not directed at big digital platforms, but was instead aimed at a company/government practice that she believes destabilizes level competition. So it earned her the name the tax lady, and it's something that's also been part of her first term as head of the Commission's Competition Authority. She's also been involved in looking at Facebook and in particular privacy and data issues. She has been and directed her competition commission to be investigating Amazon. She's spoken quite regularly on the issue of self-preferencing on platforms and the idea that when you run a platform, whether it's Google and the search platform, which was the basis of her decision on the Google shopping case, or she's talked about Amazon and their marketplace, their retail marketplace platform, she has concerns when a business runs a giant platform and also offers services in a competition on that platform. And so that's been something that she's looked at on a number of these platform businesses. It's also, for example, a part of her investigation regarding Apple and a case that's recently sort of a complaint that's been brought to her by the music streaming business Spotify, which happens to be a European-based digital company. So the issue of platforms competing on their platform as a service provider as well with other third parties is been and will almost certainly continue to be a major issue for Commissioner Vestager. Now, so what does this all mean? Well, 2 other pieces of news. One is she has not just been named as the competition commissioner for a second term. She's also been named sort of 2 other roles in the incoming European Commission government. One of them is as what's being described as sort of a vice president, one of the leading commissioners below the new European Commission president, who will therefore have more responsibility in terms of kind of an overall policy direction role. Also, she has been given a particular role in the digital economy policy space. So she's been given what's being called a digital portfolio to look at how Europe should structure their digital rules and the rules around the digital economy to make Europe more competitive going forward. That's obviously a relatively open-ended portfolio. The European government and governments have been looking at things like artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, in the context of sort of long-term competition. There's also a long-running concern that there are not many large European digital platform and other kinds of digital high-tech, really large businesses in comparison to US-based businesses and also Chinese-based businesses. So there are discussions as to how Europe can do a better job sort of fostering new and successful digital businesses to come out of Europe. That will theoretically be something that at a European Commission level at an overall European government level that she will be taking a lead on. Now, whenever I look at competition issues in the digital space from the perspective of the platformeconomyinsights.com perspective, which is the perspective of what will this mean for smaller and mid-sized digital platform businesses, I always come back to the question as to whether or not competition questions related to the largest platforms will be addressed with targeted platform remedies aimed at those platforms. In other words, is it going to be resolved through more traditional competition-focused remedies, which means you look at the dominant player and you address in some manner the problems that have evolved because of their dominance? Or will it lead to broad regulatory changes? Because broad regulatory changes offer much greater risk to smaller and mid-sized players for a host of reasons that I won't mention here. But that's a big deal. If concern with 4 or 5 super giants ends up resulting in rules of the road for the overall internet economy being changed, that could dramatically change the world for the smaller and mid-sized emerging platform businesses. And it's not as though Commissioner Vestager, in her comments in her first term as the head of the Competition Authority, has been really clear about which of the two routes she thinks makes more sense: targeted remedies or broader regulatory challenges. Now, she certainly has pursued targeted remedies, for example, in the court cases regarding Google. And she has been very focused on very large companies in, for example, her tax cases. On the other hand, I always hearken back, or at least I often hearken back, to some comments she made earlier this year when Senator Elizabeth Warren, candidate for the Democratic nomination for the presidency in the U.S., released her complaints about the giant platforms and, among other things, talked about the goal of breaking up the biggest platforms as an important remedy. That's obviously a dramatic change. That's obviously a very targeted, competition-based remedy. Commissioner Vestager at the time, because of her role as a leading champion of competition law targeting the giant platforms in Europe, she's actually been seen in most cases as being the sort of world #1 leader on this effort. She was asked about that. What did she think about breaking up the giant platforms? And her response was something akin to, whoa, that's a really big deal. That is something that we're not close to now, and we really have to take our time as to whether or not we ever get there. But most of all, she used a term called hydras. She basically said, well, what happens if you take one giant platform and you break them up into 2 or 3, but now you have 2 or 3 giant platforms, and from her perspective, maybe you have the exact same problems. And what she said was, potentially, maybe, as opposed to breaking them up, what we need to be thinking about, or what she was saying they needed to be thinking about, was regulating them. That could be a very difficult situation for smaller and even mid-sized players. Because compared to these super giant platforms, everybody else is actually relatively small. Even relatively big internet companies in a traditional sense are today really quite small, a fraction of the size, whether it's in terms of resources and market caps, or it's in terms of users, much smaller than the super giant platforms. If in fact she is more inclined to go broad regulatory routes rather than competition routes, that might be a very big challenge for smaller and mid-sized players in the coming years. We'll see that, but we're going to have some coming years because she's just been announced that she's going to have a new 5-year term as the head of the Competition Authority, as well as new responsibilities on the digital portfolio front. So with that, it's big news. If you have questions, please contact platformeconomyinsights.com. You can email me. There's a link down below. I'm the one who gets them. I'm the one who will answer them. I look forward to your questions. Until our next briefing, this is Brian Bieron with platformeconomyinsights.com. Bye-bye.